half Ironman Distance Triathlon, or an Ironman 70.3, comprises of a 1.9 kilometre swim, a 90 kilometre bike and a 21.1 kilometre run. And this distance sits nicely between an Olympic distance and a full Ironman Distance Triathlon. And this makes it very attractive for being able to get stuck into without sacrificing all of your time needing to train for it. So today I'm here to help, and I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to train for your first Ironman 70.3. If you're somebody who is aiming to complete their first Ironman 70.3, then the goal is to do enough training so that you can have a successful finish. So with that in mind, we would recommend starting out with about 6 to 7 hours of total training time each week, and this can build up to a peak training time each week of between 10 and 11 hours. Now, as a general guide, we would suggest splitting this up into 2 to 3 swims each week, about 3 rides each week, and 3 runs as well. Now, in terms of training, you want to be able to gradually increase this volume as you go over time, and ideally you want to split this up into blocks of training. So usually thinking about 4-week blocks where you build your volume over 1, 2 and 3 weeks, and then the final 4th week of each block, well, that can be a nice and easy recovery week. Now, in terms of how far out should you start this training, well, the simple answer is the sooner the better. But essentially, we would recommend having a nice block of 4 months worth of training to get yourself ready for an Ironman 70.3, or in other words, 16 weeks. But as we said, the sooner you can get going, the better. Right, let's start by discussing the swim. Now, as I mentioned already, this is actually only 400 meters further than you have in a regular Olympic distance triathlon. So really, if you've been doing some regular swim workouts in your training, it shouldn't be much of an issue to start being able to cover that extra distance. And in terms of the swim duration, really you need to be aiming to be doing about 2 kilometers in your workouts. So if we split that down into the components of the swim, and let's talk about your main set. Perhaps you would normally be doing a main set of maybe 1,000 meters in total, so something like 10 times 100 meters. Well, a good idea for focusing on Ironman 70.3 would be to start thinking about the reps being longer in duration. So you can still take that 1,000 meter total, but start thinking about breaking it down into 4 times 250 meters, 5 times 200 meters, and so on and so on. I think you can get the picture. Now, moving on to the bike, and we do have to realise that this is more than double the distance of an Olympic distance triathlon. So you have to be mindful of the fact that whereas you might have been racing for, say, 65 to 90 minutes, you now have to start thinking about the fact that you could be spending quite a bit more time in the saddle, from anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours, or even a little bit more. And although this can sound like quite a big change, it isn't actually as drastic as it might first seem. And that's because the shorter bike sessions that you're already doing, well, they are perfectly fine. But what you need to be able to do is start thinking about increasing the length of at least 1 session in the week just to get more volume. And that ideally is done at the weekends, because for most of us, that's when we have more time to focus on that. And in terms of the specifics of that session, you need to think about increasing the distance from 130 to 150% of the half Ironman distance bike leg, which is going to be somewhere in the region of 115 to 130 kilometers of riding. Now, you also have to consider the fact that you're going to be spending a lot more time in the aero bars now because of this extra distance on the bike, the 90 kilometer ride. And when I think back on it, when I was first moving up to these longer distance triathlons, the real issue I had was a stiff and achy neck, tight shoulders, and an achy lower back as well. And these all come hand in hand with that new position of trying to be aerodynamic. So to tackle this, I would suggest having bite-sized chunks of time when you're down in your aero bars, and then coming back up out of them and having a nice long break between these intervals, essentially, as you could call them, in the aero bars, and then gradually increasing the length of time that you'd spend in your aero bars and having less and less breaks between, so that before you know it, you just get much more used to riding in that position for ultimately as long as you need to when you're out training. Now when I'm riding, I don't even think twice about the fact that I'm going to be in my time trial bike as opposed to a road bike. You just become much more used to it. And this will certainly help with being able to get used to being more aerodynamic and going faster on race day. Right, now for the run. And in an Olympic distance race, this is something you can just kind of hang on in there for. I mean, it is, after all, only 10 kilometers long, and you're usually starting at about 90 minutes or 2 hours into the race or thereabouts, and essentially you can just switch on the afterburners and get after it. But this isn't really the same for an Ironman 70.3 distance. You might not be starting the run until 5 or 6 hours into your race, and that is definitely not something that you can just charge on and get through. You need to be able to run tired. And similarly to the bike, this means increasing the duration and length of time that you are running for your longer run in the week. And similar to the bike too, the weekend is a great time to do this and start thinking about putting in a long run. Ideally, you need to be building up to that 21.1 kilometer marker that you're going to be racing in the event you're going to be tackling, because it just gives you a lot more confidence knowing that you've reached that distance in total. Another good thing that you should think about for your other runs is doing what we call a brick workout, where we add in a short run off of perhaps your longer bike ride, because this just helps you start getting used to feeling more tired when you're running, but it also adds in that extra strength element that we need to tackle for these longer distance triathlons. And a final point is you could start thinking about adding in your longer run off of your longer bike too. So now you are really ready with your training. My final bit of advice would be to think about how to start fueling when you're going out for your bike rides, but in particular when you're running. You really need to be able to find something that agrees with you and you're used to being able to eat when you are exercising. Now hopefully you find this video useful, so please hit that thumb up like button. If you want to see another video that we have made about how to structure a training plan, well, you can find that here. And if you want to see 3 weekly must-do runs, well, you can find those here.